Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Lynn Cornelius, and I'm a board member of the Greeley Creative District, and I'm here to help facilitate tonight's event. So the framework for tonight's webinar will be over the next hour, our presenter, Suzi Q Smith, will share her approach to writing poetry, which will include an opportunity for you as the audience to also explore your own writing with writing prompts. Participants are muted and without video, but you may type in questions at any time in the Q&A. You'll find the Q&A button in the navigation bar at the bottom of the screen. We'll collect those questions, and in the last half hour, excuse me, we'll present those to our presenter for response. So the session is being recorded and will be posted on the Greeley Creative District website. So you'll have time to go back and revisit and share and listen to this again. And this webinar is presented by the Greeley Creative District. We're a nonprofit board whose mission is to highlight the community's distinctive creative identity and increase its economic vitality by uplifting, encouraging, incubating, promoting, and developing the arts and creative businesses in Greeley. You can find out more about our board and the district at www.greeleycreativedistrict.org. Our programming is also supported by Colorado Creative Industries. So to get us started and introduce our speaker tonight, I will pass this off to Sarah Off, who is a board member of the Greeley Creative District.
Thank you, Lynn. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Off, and if you are just joining us, this is the Greeley Creative District Cacophony of Creatives webinar, Poetry as Artivism, a Love Language for the Future. My name is Sarah, and I am actually a relatively new board member for the Greeley Creative District. I think it's been about a year for me. And I can't tell you how excited I am to be introducing this particular event tonight in honor of National Poetry Month and in celebration of the creative in all of us. I am thrilled to introduce this exciting event and our fantastic speaker for this evening, Suzi Q Smith. Suzi Q Smith is an award-winning artist, activist, and educator who lives in Denver. She is a certified change leader with Colorado Creative Industries, a NOVA EDI ambassador for the city of Denver, a TEDx speaker, and a creative writing teacher with experience designing and facilitating courses from kindergarten to university with government agencies, in correctional facilities and residential treatment centers, and more. In addition to working as a teaching artist in Denver, Suzi Q performs throughout the United States. Her most recent collection of poems, A Gospel of Bones, is available from Alternating Current Press, and her forthcoming collection, Poems for the End of the World, will be available from Finishing Line Press in June 2021. And now it is with great pleasure to introduce to you all Miss Suzi Q Smith.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Sarah and Lynn. And thank you so much for bringing me here tonight, Becky, and everyone at the Greeley Creative District, and also for the support from Colorado Creative Industries. Clearly, I've got a relationship with you guys, and we're really grateful that I get to be here this evening. So my name is Suzi Q Smith, and it's National Poetry Month. So we are going to get into some poetry, which is my primary jam. So I write a lot of things. I also teach, do a lot of different things with my voice and with art. And tonight we're going to mostly talk about poetry. So when I first was really thinking about what we would talk about tonight, I know it's got like a pretty particular name, right? Poetry is Artivism, a love language for the future, but I do mean it, right? So tonight I'm going to talk about my approach to writing poetry. I'll also share some of my poetry with you tonight. And I'll talk about my practice of writing poetry as a practice of creating hope and thinking about hope as a discipline, right? So that's a quote from Mariam Kaba. I've also been mentioned as someone described as someone who's aggressively optimistic. So we'll talk a little bit about aggressive optimism. And also we'll think about how we support and create space to our imaginations that allow us to build the future that we want to see. So we'll talk about a few of those things, and I'll give you some prompts as well as pauses brief pauses so that you can engage in some of your own writing. And then of course, at the end of this evening, we'll also have some time for some questions and answers, because as much as I can talk all night, I really love being able to have as much dialogue as possible. So if you have any questions or comments or concerns, I would love for you to put those in the Q&A so that we can chat a little bit later. So I thought I would start by sharing one of my very favorite poems. And this is not by me. This is by the legendary Lucille Clifton. And so this poem I'm going to bring up now is, if I can share my screen. I do this all the time, and yet I pause. Here we are. Okay, so I made us a slideshow, everyone. And tonight I want to begin with reading Won't You Celebrate With Me by Lucille Clifton. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And of course, this poem has resonated with me heavily since the first time I heard it, and I still think of it frequently. So when I talk about aggressive optimism, this poem is what I mean. It is a poem that acknowledges the hardships, acknowledges brutality even, acknowledges really hopeless situations, and yet still celebrating victory and finding moments. It says, yes, even surviving those things is absolutely worth celebrating, right? So when I think about my own writing practice, a lot of it is staying connected to my own path, my own experience, right? Acknowledging what that is, and sometimes processing what that is while I'm writing it, right? When I see my own words on the page, that gives my life space to breathe, but also just pausing briefly, right? And taking those, when we talk about mindfulness, right? Writing is definitely a mindfulness practice for me as well. So it's really sometimes when life is wild, as it currently is, I try to take at least a couple of minutes, right? As much as I'd like to be someone who writes every day, and I think of myself as someone who writes every day, sometimes that writing every day is a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? And so I try to take some space to find something beautiful in every moment, right? So whatever is going on in the world, I can take some breaths, I can pause, I can listen, maybe hear a bird or a squirrel or a car moving quickly or a siren or something. And I can describe that sensory experience, right? I might find a smell that I can describe as beautiful. I might see something I can describe as beautiful. I might remember something I can describe as beautiful. And so being in those small moments of just writing what's exactly happening in each moment, right, can help me to navigate really, really challenging times. So that's part of my writing practice, right? It's about hope and it's about inspiration. It's also about just sort of finding a path back to myself, right? Sometimes when we get too far astray, or I'll say it when I get too far astray, my writing helps me to remember who I am and comes back to myself, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. So again, I mentioned earlier that I'm sometimes described as being aggressively optimistic. And I think about this poem and its unflinching determination, right? It acknowledges the full truth and insists on celebrating survival in spite of the odds. So it's important for me to distinguish aggressive optimism, which is also just fierce determination, right? And faith versus toxic positivity, which is also something that I find quite commonly. I think that right now, at this stage of the pandemic, I think that there's a lot that people are clinging to right now to just sort of find some hope and keep going, right? And we're seeing some things that are very hopeful and very encouraging. And sometimes I'm even seeing like some demands of good vibes only, right? Or, this refusal to acknowledge any of the hard things. And I think that's really, there's a reason we call that toxic positivity, right? Because it's not allowing full humanity. I'm generally a pretty positive and upbeat person. I usually have a pretty specific outlook, right? That allows me to bring some light and joy into most rooms that I go into. However, I'm also a complete person who feels a whole range of feelings, often at the same time, which of course is why I write poetry in the first place, right? I create from a couple of places, right? Both the void in a need to have something that doesn't exist, right? So I make it. Also the excess, which is maybe more often the case, particularly with poetry, in which I feel something much too deeply to contain it inside my body. So it's got to go somewhere. And that includes a full range of emotion, which is glorious rage, fear, right? Incredible sorrow and grief, right? And also joy and beauty. All of those things live in me. All of those things show up in my poetry. So I'm going to share a few poems with you tonight. That are about sort of, that emotional process and practice. And also I'm a little bit inspired by nature, right? Looking out of windows. I do live in a city and have always lived in a city, and yet I find ways to sort of grab onto whatever nature that is. And so sometimes it's sitting on a front porch, right? Amidst construction traffic. Sometimes it is looking out a window. Sometimes it is being in a park, right? Or sometimes it's even like delving into nature and putting my feet in a river. So there are a lot of different things, and also being in gardens, right? Gardens are definitely a place where I draw a lot of comfort and inspiration, and remember like life cycles, death cycles, all of those things. So a lot of the poems you'll hear tonight are from Poems for the End of the World. And they are about those cycles, right? And the many, many beginnings and endings of worlds. So I thought I would start this evening with a poem called Ocotillo, which is named for a specific plant. Ocotillo. When a seed is planted or buried, abandoned to the soil, it may not know this is a gift. Yes, sis, cry, wail, moan, tear your hair and gnash your teeth, all of that. Then wash the dishes. For much of the year, Ocotillo appears to be an arrangement of large, spiny, dead sticks. With rainfall, the plant becomes lush and green with leaves. When water is scarce, the leaves turn brown and fall off. Every earth-cracked, thirsty yearning is a seed. Plant it. Let it crane toward the sun and bloom. Do seeds, the small ones, say mustard, ever get jealous or pray to become bigger seeds? Do they ever wish they could fill themselves up with air? Is that how they imagine growth? Sometimes I press my fingers toward the invitation of sky and say yes, bend my face to the sun and laugh. Remember how I once clung to the shell I believed was me. With rain, we find Ocotillo swelling, blooming open into bloodshot flowers, earning it the name desert coral. Girl, braid your hair or wrap it up and go, even weeping if you must. Somewhere the sun will touch your face. The hummingbird, migrating through the long desert, relies upon the flowers of the Ocotillo for honey nectar. Did you forget the kindness of wind and its longing for your skin? The unrepentant gaze of desert sky, the rivers that open their mouths to your sorrows, ready to carry them someplace you don't need to go. I reimagine myself daily. I abandon old wounds to the soil until they fertilize it. Everything, even waste, has a purpose. Ocotillo can grow up to 20 feet tall. Some say they can live over 100 years. Yes, sis, live. Let your bare feet sink into the mud. I have been afraid and filled with air before. Did not know I was a small, hard world, becoming large as I unfold. And I will tell you, and I will tell me, I forget and forget my way. What is sweeter than longing for loose, escapable soil is to be rooted in rock, becoming honey on a tender tongue. This next poem is also a meditation on spring and seeds and growth. And I'm still thinking about its title. So if you have some ideas about it, this is a draft. So you'll be the first to hear it tonight, but I felt called to it this evening. So untitled for now. To the seed I grew from, I say, I remember how the earth welcomed me into her mouth, tucked me behind her favorite tooth and sucked until I sprouted, My seed body collapsing, shrugging into a narrow gap against her incisor, sticking there like popcorn, and my new legs leaping sturdy forward, stubborn as sumac or maybe tree of heaven, rooted, determined, unapologetic. Praise the courage to open, to lean toward an idea of sun, even if unmet, to grow into the faith of growth, even against the whisperings of rocks who perhaps do not believe in seeds, who would convince me I'm a lesser version of them, who laugh at my pressing toward a sky I haven't seen. But I do remember something about swans and their soaring, their long-necked plunging and grace. A swan who mouthed the word ugly with humor, saying it back to herself until it lost any meaning at all, except to say to her eventual flock, remember this word? They called us once. I never understood what it meant or why it made them laugh so nervously or why it made them look so small, so shamefully exposed. And that is my imagined conversation and relationship between rocks and seeds. If you have some thoughts on a title, again, I'd love to hear them later. And sometimes, this happens frequently, I'll tell you the truth. Often, I create a list of what I think I'm going to read, and then something else happens, and I've just decided in this moment that I must read a different poem than what I had originally planned. And so the next poem I want to read is a guide, how to move back into your body. And I feel like that is the poem that is knocking at my teeth right now. And so that's part of my process as well, is listening. Writing poetry has a lot to do with listening. And so this is a guide, how to move back into your body. 1, to move back into your body, you must begin by remembering the nests and caves that you have carved your name on, every home you have hidden in. You must remember all that you have left there and ask it to return. Your body is the only geography. It will know the way. 2, call your names to the winds, all of your names, the ones that belong to you, the ones that your skin still remembers wearing. Keep calling the names until they sing. They will sing. Answer them, yes. Press your tongue flat, open your mouth and sing, yes. It is the only answer one can give in times like these. 3, when your voice begins to vibrate against the tight drum of your throat, when it rattles against your teeth and your cheekbones quiver, plant your feet and spread your arms and learn to breathe. 4, feel the tips of your fingers throb and hum with their new pregnant morning. Clap your hands against your thighs and dance to the resounding echo of your sonorous plump. Eat, drink, laugh until you are music again. Name each moving part, yes. Call the name yes until they open. 5, breathe. Be a hymn for each dawn's dew. Be a sweet whisper, yes. 6, you were once a single drop of water fleeing a dry, hungry tornado, but you will soon see that you are a swallower of storms. That is the grumble in your belly. Say yes. 7, somewhere inside your body, in your belly button perhaps, or lodged deep in your throat lies the only key you have ever needed to free yourself. Dive into the sunless and press the dark until it opens, revealing itself against your electric fingers. It is there, I promise. I'll read a couple of more poems, and then we're going to get into our first prompt. So it'll be your turn to write. And this poem is called Sing Over the Bones. And this is what we call the Black Girl Blues. Ain't called it depression so much as Tuesday, when we forget the promise of a Saturday night sweat and Sunday morning song. When we forget to call tomorrow holy, because it's another hill to climb. When today leaves bruises, catches round our throats and leaves our voices whispers. When we forget to rebuke the madness and call it the truth, we must remember to say to ourselves, you are not crazy. Resist when they snap at you to stretch your scabbed skin back over your bones. You will grow it anew every time. If your veins are easy to see, this does not mean that you are easy to kill, only that your life is impossible to ignore. You are a bleeding sun. When the calluses form, tear your skin from its meat. Peel yourself open and let them smell the fruit of you. Spill into every mouth that speaks your name. Stain their fingers, you, magnificent point of light, a swallowing supernova. You are hammer and pickaxe, belly full of lava. You are a forever thing. When dark has forgotten its own weakness, you are flame dancing it into hush. You are a blistering miracle, sun and sand tangled into indistinguishable horizon hum. And the earth will keep on course. You song, you lovely, you yes, you fiery stone mouth, you fleshy mirror, you pulpy always, you marvelous in your questing, glorious in pursuit of humble corners, you worship, you godchild, you queen of margins and handwritten notes. There is nothing wrong with you. You are a unicorn in a herd of goldfish muddying the pond, and no one has learned yet to sing your name. You star, you stone, you shine, you always, you inextinguishable, you perfect, you perfect. And now I believe I would like to pause, and I'm going to share my screen once again so that we can write together. So I'm going to go through this slowly, and what I will encourage you to do is grab something to write on and with. And while you do that, I'm going to read this slowly. Now, of course, you can find the video for this on Greeley Creative District's website. So you can always play this back, pause it for as long as you need to, and get these prompts again. So we'll begin by considering the practice of finding beauty, right? So what were the small and beautiful moments of your morning? You think about when you woke up today. How did that feel? What was the first delicious thing you tasted today? What was the best thing you smelled this morning? Maybe it was you in the shower. Ooh, maybe it was your toothpaste. Whatever it was. What were the small and beautiful moments? What were the small and beautiful moments of your afternoon, your evening? And if nothing comes to mind for today because today has been horrific, then you can certainly consider using a photograph or a recent memory, or you can keep these things in mind tomorrow, right? As you just pause and go like, that's beautiful. Try to count 5 beautiful things in every room you walk into. Once we have a general idea and some pretty specific things, then we'll zoom in on some of the details, right? We'll try to get closer to them. So when it comes to that, like describing each moment with sensory details, right? So what are the smells? What are the sounds? What are the tastes? How would you describe all of those things, and how specific can we get? How much can you invite us into that beauty, right? How can we celebrate that and experience it with you? So sensory descriptions are a great place to start when it comes to writing poetry. And sometimes even when nothing is happening, right? Just writing down those sensory experiences that you're having can help us to come into a moment with you, right? And give you also some time to pause and be mindful of what you're currently experiencing in your body, right? And also outside of your body, right? In your environment, right? So describing what objects have caught your attention, what animals, what people, right? What might those objects symbolize? What gentle or sweet interactions did you experience or observe, either between other humans, again, animals, again, television, right? Anything that really like made you go, oh, so that sort of a moment. And what was the best thing you tasted today? What was the best thing you smelled today? So those are some questions as you come into each day, like thinking about like, okay, what in this moment can be celebrated? What can be savored? What do I want to keep here? What do I want to hold on to? My dear friend Bianca McCon has this saying. She says, all joy I find, I keep, right? This is one of the ways that you can keep those small joys. And when you do this as like a journaling practice, right? Or as a poetry practice, then later you can look back and go, these things that I was really only halfway paying attention and just writing down a few little lines of what I smelled. what I tasted, what was delicious about today. And then you have a whole collection of all of these really beautiful, sweet or savory and delicious things that you can remember. And those can be really important ways to remind yourself of yourself and the beauty that also exists, right? So I'm going to keep this up for a moment in case you're copying it down. And then I'm going to read you some more poems. And the screen share is going in 3, 2, 1. When we're writing, I do try to whisper us back. I'm going to read us a couple of more poems. And when we also think about visioning, right? So part of my writing practice is observing, right? Just paying attention to what's happening in me, around me, and recording that, right? Just making some sort of record and processing it, right? Thinking about it, feeling about it, all of those things, right? And then also, I love writing as this tool for time travel, right? And manifestation. So when we think about it in these ways, right? Writing can be a pretty powerful tool to keep us focused on who it is we are, what it is that we want. And so I'll share a little bit of some of my sort of visionary writing, some of my time travel writing. Can move in all directions, right? In writing. And oh, I even did make us a slide, everyone. The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And that is Toni Cade Bambara. And I think about the role of artists, the role of activists, and I'm very, very fortunate when I think about the time in which I am alive, right? So we started with the Lucille Clifton poem, and there's a part there where she says, I had no model, right? So she had to make it up, right? Here on this bridge between starshine and clay. And I'm very, very grateful that I have many models, right? That I got to come into the world and that's already have this way made by Lucille Clifton and Gwendolyn Brooks and Maya Angelou and Toni Cade Bambara and Toni Morrison and Alice Walker. And there are so many, June Jordan, so many authors who came before me who paved this way. So I actually didn't have to make it up, right? I have many, many models. And so Toni Cade Bambara is one of them. When I think about those inspirations, right, it reminds me, for one, that I'm not alone in this world, right? And I'm not imagining the things that I experienced. There are other people, right, that have experienced these things and also left some maps and some guidebooks to navigate through it. And also that's part of my work as a writer, right, is reaching back and making sure that I'm leaving some breadcrumbs for the future generations, right, including my own daughter. So I'm going to read a couple of poems that sort of time travel, considering ancestry and then also considering the future. And both are very centered around the idea of liberation. And so I'll start with a poem called When I Am Free. Assume there was never a plan for my freedom. I hold my hands out, open palmed, snap off each finger and say, here, eat. Laugh, fear brings out the mob in people, an unsheathed ear, an unleashed fear, an opening, unveiled mirror. I'm not claiming to be any type of messiah. Who knows loneliness better than a free drawn, clear breath? I shatter whole buildings that would have me bend to enter and imagine myself free. An arrow with wings who shot herself into the sky, piercing and open, a radical act of love for air and night and blue and speed. What is freedom but a devotion to opening, a madness unconfined, a clear note played long and wet, a soft landing in soft black soil, When I am free and here I sing ooh and leap into a Holy Ghost dance. When I am free and here even the angels laugh with me in my delight. When I am free, honey, you have never heard such a hallelujah. Nectar never tasted so sweet. This next piece is, I think I'll share the prompt with you first. I think I'll share the prompt with you because I wrote this during, in preparation for a workshop. And so when I lead workshops, I don't like to ask participants to do anything that I haven't done myself. So I was preparing for this workshop and I had the poems and I had the prompts, and then I realized I had not written these prompts myself. And so I sat down and wrote. So this piece became alive at that time. So I'm going to share this next prompt with you, and then I'll share what happened for me. And here's, of course, that quote from Tony K. Bambara, author of Gorilla My Love and Salt Eaters. So our prompt is, imagine yourself in the future. Now we're going to get weird and abstract because it's me and I'm weird and abstract, but we're going to time travel. And so in this prompt, we're going to imagine ourselves in the future, right? And in this future, we have built a world that we are proud of. So my question for you is, what is your revolutionary vision for the best possible outcome for the future? It is so important that we imagine a beautiful future for ourselves, for future generations, so that we have a destination in mind, right? We have to believe it's possible. We have to stoke that vision in ourselves and each other so that we don't get drowned in misery, right? Also, it begins with an idea, right? And also we've got to engage the heart. That's so important, right? We learn so many things and we get so much data and all of this information, and we work towards change and we get involved in so many different movements, right? I think about Sonia Sanchez, who is another writer who I'm deeply grateful for. And Sonia Sanchez said, for any movement to be sustainable, it has to be rooted in love. And I think about that, right? And some of my poems, that even the ones that are the most rage fueled, are all love poems, right? All of it is born out of love. And if we haven't engaged the heart, there's nothing that can be sustainable. So we must engage the heart. And we also must prevent our imaginations from atrophy, right? We've got to keep them from atrophying. We've got to keep them moving, right? So in this world where all things are possible, and it might be easiest if you take yourself into a dark room, listen to some instrumental music, vibe however you vibe, create a mood where you can really vision, right? Dream, think about these things. What is the best possible outcome for the future? What's the best possible outcome for the future 1 year from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 7 generations from now? All of those questions, right? And I'd like for you to take some time thinking about all of those things. What is the best possible outcome? What if everything goes right? Once you've decided those things, right, and you've given us maybe some sensory details of that future, then I want you to visualize yourself in this life, in this future, and take some time to write about how you feel inside this future, inside this world that you're creating. How are you the same? How have you changed? Where are you? Who are you with? Who will you be when you are fully free? How will you know for sure you are there? And this takes a little while, right? To really, really create a world, put yourself there, decide what else is happening. Now we've traveled all the way to the future that we've created. And the next part of this, where it gets a little weird, right, is we'll look back at the past, right? And so, as if you are telling this story to the young ones, and you are an elder at this point, I want you to visualize the journey to the world that you're proud of. Once you're there, look back. Write the story of the movement's pinnacle victory, identifying the moment when you knew you would win. Write this story as if you are telling it in the future to the young ones listening at your feet. And this is time travel writing at its finest. So I'm going to leave this up for a moment. And of course, if you have some questions about it, we can talk about it in the Q&A in a little while too, because I realize we're traveling back and forth here. And I'm going to stop screen sharing in 3, 2, 1. And now I will read you. We sang ourselves free. We didn't always know we would win, just that we would do whatever we had to in order to get free. We used to sing softly to each other, to ourselves, hum low under our breath to remember our voices in places we were unwelcome. We danced in secret. We laughed silently across rooms, taking our quiet joys and tucking them into our pockets like perfumed handkerchiefs we could smell later when we needed to remember. Our foremothers and forefathers built a bridge of sound and hope that only a few could hear. We heard their call from the heavens, though, and we answered them all. We answered, becoming flesh and voice and song. If you listen closely enough, you will know how beautiful we are. Someone tried to stop their music, the love they found each other in, tried to turn them into silence as if they could ever be less than furious messengers of a love lived out loud. Everything we do is song. We are a dance unsilenceable. One day, we saw the first rose bloom in years when we sang the low notes we'd been singing since before time had a name. We got louder. More people joined in the song and the grasses awoke from their slumber. The wolves came and sat at our feet, weeping. The rains came down and the trees remembered us. We began again and we knew God was listening. And the rains came the way they come, slow and sweet at first, washing the old ash and dust to the rivers. And then again, there were rivers where we washed our hands and feet, where we washed each other's hair, where we sang our old songs and the earth heard, answering in heather and pine. And she answered. In the day's harvest, yellows spiraling into violets, sweets wrapping themselves in spicy oranges and fuchsias, tumbling over each other to embrace the sour and soft fruit of each other. We ate and grew fat again. We all fell madly in love and raised perfect children, the sort of perfect that brought us into each day laughing. We grinned, rich as noonday, each of us carrying the songs and teaching them to the children, how to stretch a note all the way into fingertips until the trees begin to sway. You feel that? We said to each other, our hairs standing to answer the electric air. Yes, we answered. Yes. And that poem is my version of the liberated future, our journey, and the moment, the pinnacle of our victory. I'll share one more piece that many of you might know, we'll see. I like to perform this in rooms with people who can sing it along with me. So if you're at home and you know this one, feel free to sing along. This is my first time performing this in Zoom Live with an audience that I can't. This might be my first time performing this in Zoom Live, but it wasn't on my list, but it's again, sometimes pieces come knocking. And so I must answer. That's part of the role of being a poet. So this is something that I wrote many years ago when I was holding my nephew who was an infant then, and I was singing him to sleep. And this is called Sleeping Giant. I am a sleeping giant. There lives a riot in my bones. I am a mouthful of sea. I am a quiet indigo dawn. Can snap along with me if you like. Here we are. Sometimes hope's the only space between your face and a hard rock, and prayer's the only major in the school of the hard knocks. Blisters on my feet from seeking, walking for blocks, but I can tell the light from shadow, hear the truth when it talks. I'm so moved, I remove both of my shoes, shake out the rocks, embrace myself for the walk, and it's a long road, but my spirit is ready. I'm laying down my armor cause it's gotten too heavy. I am a sleeping giant. There lives a riot in my bones. I am a mouthful of seed. I am a quiet indigo dawn. The only real constant in my life is me. I change pace and change lane, still in the driver's seat. Slay demons, smash walls when they're blocking me. Hiding weapons in the words while I'm looking for peace. I said my peace, I hold my peace. I seek the east for new horizons. I'm climbing, crying while and trying to find the highest. Dying to find the light beyond the brightest. I try to be that beacon you've been seeking. I'm dispelling all the shadows. The sun, the moon, the stars commune to show you where the light goes, how the wind blows and the earth turns and the river runs and the fire burns. And I'm still here and I'm still now. Like lightning is urgent and thunder is loud. And here's the part where the sleeping giant wakes up and she says, these old winds stirring up the ground around me. Some said freedom must have come and found me. I've been breaking up what bound me around here so I can breathe. I am a sleeping giant. There lives a riot in my bones. Thank you all ever so much for joining tonight, whether you're watching live, if you're watching this later. I hope that you have enjoyed these poems. I hope they put some hop in your step, some warmth in your heart, and I hope the prompts serve you well. I'll share the slides once again, just in case you'd like to revisit any of those and see those prompts again. And so our first prompt was here. Again, moving through the small and beautiful moments of your morning, of your afternoon, your evening, focusing on sensory details, any objects that catch your attention and what they might symbolize, any gentle or sweet interactions that you might experience or observe. And of course, the best thing you tasted or smelled. So that's the first series. And the next, of course, is a bit more complex. Imagine yourself in the future. We built a world we are proud of. What is your revolutionary vision for the best possible outcome for the future? Visualizing yourself in this life, how you feel, how you're the same, how you're different, where you are and who's with you. Who will you be when you're fully free? And how do you know for sure when you're there? Once you visualize this, then visualize the journey to that place, to the world you're proud of. And once you're there, look back, right? And write the story of the movement's pinnacle victory, identifying the moment when you knew you would win. And write the stories if you're telling it in the future to young ones listening at your feet. So those are our prompts. I hope that you enjoy your writing. Happy visioning. And with that, I'd like to welcome back perhaps Sarah and Lynn.
Wonderful, Suzi.
Thank you so very much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
I just want to say personally, hearing you read and perform tonight in this moment in time was a balm for the soul. Thank you so much.
Suzi, that was remarkable. I felt a little bit like I was glad there was some time between having to come back on here because I was pulling myself back together. I really have no words for that. Thank you so much for being here. It's truly an honor to hear your work and listen to you talk about how you create. I think that we all feel very fortunate to have you here. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad we can talk about these things. The world is a wild one.
Indeed.
It is a wild one. And I want to remind everybody who's with us tonight that to please submit your question and answers in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We did have one question early on from Tom about having the text of your poem show as you read. And I was curious, I have a follow-up question to that around the performance aspects of your reading. And because I know that of course you have your books, and then there's also the performance. And so I'm wondering, it's a two-part question. Can you remind us of where we can see the text versions of your poetry? And also my question about is more of a broad opening for your comments about performing and how that is important to your work.
So to answer the first question, so Zoom has like a third-party feature that allows closed captions, but it's not built into Zoom, which is a little bit frustrating because it makes it less accessible for people who want to participate. The good news is when this is on YouTube later, you can certainly turn the captions on, and it's usually about as accurate as voice to text. So, so somewhat, it will give you a general idea. The actual text, the poems I read tonight, except for the new untitled one, you can find those in the books. So the first one is A Gospel of Bones, and that is from Alternating Current Press, which is actually based here in Colorado. They're in Boulder. And so that one is available at their website, Alternating Current Press. If you Google A Gospel of Bones, it's available in all of the places where you buy books. And the second is not out yet, but it is open on pre-order at Finishing Line Press, and that's called Poems for the End of the World, right? Again, it's about the beginnings and ends, and most of what I read tonight is from Poems for the End of the World. And it's very much about those life and death cycles and those grief cycles and all of those things. So it's been definitely a time. And I actually wrote most of those poems before the pandemic. And so there were already some world endings, right? But in thinking about, those sort of world endings and end times, right? People have been feeling that for such a long time. And every generation sort of has these end time prophecies and beliefs. And those have been going on since humanity, I think, probably. And also another thing that's been going on since humanity is poetry, right? Poetry is an oral language. It's an oral tradition. Poetry has always been meant to be read aloud. Granted, I do enjoy writing on paper. That is where my poems start. Well, I have a line in my head perhaps, but paper is a medium that I very much enjoy. And I like being able to work with the page. And I also like to be able to voice those things, right? So one thing that's been nice on Zoom is being able to screen share sometimes, and I can show a poem while I'm reading it. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So it kind of depends on what we're doing. But poetry is an oral language, so I think that it's important to read it aloud. And so that's definitely a part of my practice. And hearing it in voices, one thing that I've been doing to celebrate National Poetry Month is beloved friends of mine, since I couldn't do a traditional book release for either book, I've had my dear friends reading these poems and making videos of them reading my poems. And I've been posting those on my YouTube channel. And so every day I'm releasing one video of someone else reading one of my poems. And so it's like I get to celebrate these books with my friends. And also in so many ways, it's like I'm hearing them for the first time. And so I get these videos from them, and then I just hang out missing my friends and listening to them read these poems and just cry. And that's cool. It's fine. I'm on crying. So I think we should probably all just cry regularly. I learned from one of my students today who is in 6th grade, and she said, "Miss, did you know that crying makes your eyelashes longer?" And I was like, this is why I love being a teacher. All the moments that it's been hard. There's so many really beautiful and hilarious and sweet moments that I get to have with them. And so if I get to help them normalize some crying, then I think we're doing great. So amongst adults, I think we should normalize crying. That's definitely, crying is a big part of my writing process as well. So I also see a question from Becky about working through writer's block. I don't believe that writer's block exists. I think that blocks are extensions of other kinds of blocks, right? I think sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves to be writing, or we think we sometimes get too much in our heads about what we're supposed to be writing, and then that's not the thing that wants to come out. And so part of it is just the surrender. And sometimes You might have to surrender to a quietude for a little while and a non-creative time where you're just processing and feeling and thinking and living, and also like planting seeds in yourself that are later going to bloom into some art. You know, I think we live in this society that's expecting us to be productive 100% of the time. But when you hang out with nature, like that's not facts. Like seeds go in the ground, they think they're dying. This is not, we're not constantly fruiting all the time, and we shouldn't be. And so I think that it's okay to rest, right? Rest is a really, really important practice for all of us. And so like observing the seasons, right? And there are times that we do different things in different seasons. So again, I try to write every day just as part of my own sort of tracking and wellness, but it's not in a way that is productive writing. This is sort of a process writing. It's not writing that's going to go anywhere that I'm trying to make anything out of. It's just part of my observational and mindfulness practice. So that's one thing. It's just, again, like sitting with myself, feeling my feelings, smelling my smells, thinking my thoughts, etc., and writing a few things down. If I can write a few lines down every day, I'm doing great, especially right now. So that's, I think, how I feel about writer's block. And then when the writing is ready to come, it comes. I think it also is helpful to keep your creative muscles engaged, right? When I was a teenager and I was going to open mics all the time, all over Denver, and someone asked me if I was serious about writing. I was the only teenager, except for whichever teenager friend I dragged with me to this whatever coffee shop we could find. And we'd look at the Westward every week in the back and go like, okay, that's a poetry reading, I'm going. And so we'd be, you know, the only young people there usually. And someone asked me if I was serious about writing. And I said, well, yes, of course. And they said, you want to be a writer when you grow up? And I said, absolutely. And they said, okay, do you write every day? And I said, no, I write when I'm inspired. They said, that's wonderful. However, how do you expect to run a marathon if you don't jog every day? And so I said, well, leave me alone. And I had to process that for a while. And I still think about that, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of like kind of keeping those muscles ready so that when the real poem comes along, I'm in shape to write it. And sometimes that means I'm just reading a lot. Sometimes it means I'm writing little bits every day. Sometimes it just means I'm feeling my feelings, and all of those things, or hanging out with people who are going to inspire me, or going on walks, or sitting in gardens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of those life practices that are going to eventually inform that writing. So that's how I feel about writer's block. I hope that answered your question.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Suzi. We have another question from Tom, and he asks, could you recommend 3 poets we should be reading? One who is a living elder, one who's mid-career and at the height of their skills, and one who is up and coming but awesome.
I don't know if I can define anyone as mid-career or up and coming. Those are such strange terms to me when I think about them, right? I think I often laugh about sort of the writing world uses, the arts world really uses this term like emerging, right? There's always these different guidelines of like, wait, have I emerged? Am I emerging? No, I'm not, you know. And there were definitely some times, especially before these 2 books came out, where I thought like, okay, am I emerging? And then they were like, no, ma'am, you have emerged. And then there were other times when I was not emerged enough to apply for the emerging. So it's kind of difficult to know. But I would say I read living poets all the time. Some of my favorite local, I would say, so an elder poet who I love, who just released a book, is Wayne Gilbert. I took classes with him when I was a young one, and we are still friends to this day. He just released a book, and I think it is on my downstairs bookshelf, so I can't get it right now. But Wayne Gilbert, he is here in Colorado, and he's a lovely human being and a beautiful writer. So I would say Wayne Gilbert locally. I would say mid-career. I don't know what the middle of a career is. I think that many days I feel so old, other days I feel brand new, and then other days I look and go, wait, I might only be halfway through my life. I might not even be halfway through it, which is wild to consider. My grandmothers are both still living. One is 91, the other is 96. I might still be here for a while. I don't know. So what is mid-career? I read a lot of different poets. I'd say one poet you might not know, and I'm not sure if they have other books, but I'm looking at this book right now, and it's been making me feel all types of feelings, is Rashid Copeland, who lives in Washington, D.C., and he just released a book called Mud Jubilee, and it is absolutely beautiful. So I've been reading that one quite a lot. I'm going to glance at like what's on my bookshelf right here. I'm reading a lot of, well, this isn't poetry, but well, arguably, Jesmyn Ward, everything she writes. I'm looking at everything else here. Khadijah Queen, I'd say Khadijah Queen. If you don't know Khadijah, she's here in Colorado now. She is transitioning out of Colorado, sadly. But Khadijah Queen is a brilliant author. She has several books of poetry, several collections. She's on faculty at Regis and also I think at CU. And then transitioning, she's leaving Colorado, but she's a brilliant poet. So I think she's got maybe 5 collections of poetry. So she's also currently local to Colorado. Also, I would say, oh, Tamika Coleman. Tamika Coleman has got her first book coming out next year. Also, oh, Deborah Jang has a beautiful collection of poems, Float True. She's local to Colorado. So there are many, many. I could name so many poets that we should be reading. And then for watching, you know, YouTube's a great resource also for contemporary poets. One thing, I spent about 12 years in slam poetry. And while in some ways that was confining, it was also very, very rich. And I met and got to love a lot of different poets and make a lot of beautiful friendships and relationships that way. One thing that's beautiful about slam poetry and open mics, right, and oral traditions is that there's no gatekeeper, right? Getting a book published can be an incredibly difficult process. And there's a ton of rejection involved, and there are many, many hoops to move through. And so following the slam world, right, a lot of that community was cultivated because we were so locked out of every other literary space, right? So many of us came to performing poetry, right? Performance is not my natural gift, by the way. I am not a natural performer. I'm an extremely shy person, very, very quiet. I was so quiet as a child that people thought that I could not speak. My very first time performing, I did laugh myself off of stage. That is literal, not figurative. I was so nervous, I started giggling, and then I rolled completely off the stage onto the floor and continued to laugh because, of course, it was funny. So there was that. It was not my go-to, right? But because I needed so much to be heard, because I needed so much to share, because I couldn't contain everything in me anymore, I had to find a way to get those words out. And so as a teenager, I was, you know, I had my Poets and Writers subscription, and I would be sending off my little terrible poems to whatever magazine didn't have a submission fee and getting rejected all the time, which is fine. I'm glad that those poems only live in my Foot Locker and not anywhere else in the world. But part of that, right? So again, like watching poets on YouTube can be a great way to find poets that you might not find anywhere else. So on Button Poetry, on All Deaf Poetry, and on Right About Now, those are a few places where you can find some pretty incredible poets.
Great, thanks for those resources. What a great list. Allison asks, do you have a good writing prompt for children?
What age group, Allison?
Let's see.
I have many.
6 to 7. Ages 6 to 7.
6 to 7. There, I think usually haiku is a great place to start because we can start learning about counting syllables. So I love doing haiku with young children, and we can start counting, right? And that's also a great nature walk practice, right? Going outside and going like, okay, what animal do you see or hear? And then counting those syllables and start building that into haiku, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. And that can be a great way to walk to the park and experience, right? And that can be a great game to play and sort of passing poems back and forth. Also, rhyme games are really, really wonderful for young people as well. But a lot of these same practices, right, for little ones of like, okay, wherever we are, right? Sort of the game, like I spy with my little eye something green, right? What do you see that's beautiful around you? What was the best thing you tasted today? What was the best thing you smelled? What is the best thing you ever remember tasting in your entire life? What was that like? And let's start thinking about the ingredients and how to make it. Also, a wonderful practice with children is having them teach you how to do something, right? And as they consider like, okay, what is a thing you know how to do? Or what's a thing you can imagine doing, right? Like if you were going to teach me how to fly, what would I need to know? What do I have to do? How do we get ready, right? If I were going to turn myself pink, how would I do that, right? If I were going to gain a superpower, how would I do that? How should we use it? And so in those dialogues can be a great way to start getting young people to really engage that imagination freely and keep it alive and healthy, because 6 to 7-year-olds are already so here for it. And they're like, yeah, let's take over the world. Let's grow wings right now. Let's get into it. Let's bounce on marshmallow clouds. Let's do it. And so that's a great way to engage.
That's awesome. We have another question from Deb. You mentioned listening being an important part of your process. Can you expand on that a bit more? How have you sharpened the skill of listening to your creativity?
One practice is to either find a place to sit silently and literally list out each sound, everything that I hear, and write it down. And then the experience of that sound, maybe the journey of that sound, and what story it might be connected to, where that sound is coming from, who it's attached to, what it's attached to, what it reminds me of, right? So that's part of it. And also another practice is listening and sort of creating a map of sound. Sometimes I'll go for a walk. This is a great like sort of nature walk, hike, walking through a park, walking through a neighborhood though also works well. And writing down everything that you hear and describing your journey and creating basically a map of that journey, but only through one sense, right? So describing it only in sounds, or describing it only in smells, or describing it only in sights, and giving us colors or images, right, of what you see on this journey. So choosing one sense to really hone in on and taking us on that walk with you, describing again, just one sense. And that can be one way to really connect to that sensory writing.
Great, thank you. Okay, Becky has another question. Many artists say the hardest part of artwork is knowing when to stop. How do you know when you are done with a poem?
Poems are never done, only abandoned, right? And eventually I think that there are times, poetry is an obsessive language. And so it is very easy to obsess over a syllable. It's easy to obsess over a single comma, a single word, a single sound. And eventually I have to just get over myself as part of that practice and go like, this is, I'm the only person that cares about this part. Like, is it doing this thing, right? And I really try to avoid, being clever or being good. I think that those things are not necessarily serving the art or serving the audience or serving the piece or serving me. My question for it is, am I saying what I mean in this moment? Is this an actual expression of how I felt in this moment? Am I expressing the thing that I'm trying to express accurately? Am I doing it as accurately as possible, as cleanly as possible? Because I really try to avoid getting messy. It's kind of like, if you realize you have a few extra minutes and then you start doing more things to your hair, or you start doing more and you go like, well, maybe I'll put on this. Maybe I'll try this. Why don't I ever wear this jacket with this sweater and shirt and jacket and pants and skirt? And you start just doing a lot of unnecessary extra things. I think sometimes it can be that way with poetry. We just start like picking at it for too long and entertaining yourself with that, right? And so I think that I get my ego out of the way and go like, well, this is what that poem is. And also detaching it from me at a certain point. I think it helps that I do have an adult daughter, right? And so there's this point where I kind of can consider where she did start with me, but she's also an adult person who has her own life and identity. There's still a ton of me attached to her for sure. And I still love her so much. And also she's her whole person who belongs to herself. And often poems are that way too. Anything that we create, right? Once you share it with an audience, it stops being yours. It becomes everyone's, right? And I think about, often I use this sort of analogy. When we listen to a song, the song is living its song life. It's on the radio, doing its thing. The song hasn't changed. Maybe when I hear this song, I feel jubilant because it was my high school graduation theme song and I'm in this place when I hear this song. And maybe it was at a funeral for you, right? So when we hear this exact same song, we have very, very different emotional reactions. We have very, very different relationships to it. Those contextual cues are entirely different. And it's not the song's fault, right? We're all bringing ourselves to it. We're bringing our own experience to it. And so I have to release poems in that way as well. And anything that I make is like, well, that's an interesting perception. That's not at all what I meant, but that's what you heard. Cool. That's, and now I'm just like sort of curious about that. And I observe it, I think with curiosity, not a lot of judgment, because I don't know that the goal is necessarily to make everyone feel the way that I feel or make everyone agree with me. I do like to make people feel something. That's certainly a goal.
That's excellent. That's yeah, I love that you brought up music because quite serendipitous. The next question has to do with that. And it's from Bree. She asks, do you also write song lyrics? What's your favorite way to collaborate with musicians or other types of creatives? Thanks for asking that, Bree, because I was going to ask that being a musician myself. So that's great. I'd like to hear about this too.
I do write music. I do write songs. I've been focused more on writing for the last couple of years, but I am working on some new songs. So this summer, that is the plan, to work on some songs. I have a lot of musician friends. I work with Youth on Record, which is primarily a music-based youth organization. So I work with a ton of different musicians. I have not been performing music for a while, so I'm excited about it. But I have some new material that I'm excited about, and one that will be released in June for sure. That's a collaboration with my dear friend and sister, Bianca McCon, who I mentioned a little while ago. And so she and I are working on some things, but I also have a few different solo songs that I'm working on, etc. But I grew up in a very musical family, very artistic family. And so music is part of my breath, the same way poetry is.
Okay, Pam asks, was there a specific person that influenced you to start writing poetry, or was it a natural calling?
Oh, definitely influence, and both. I think there might have been there's both nature and nurture in there. My great-grandfather was a poet. I was raised by my grandmother, and her father was a poet. So I was raised on poetry. Again, my family is pretty artistic, and so it's not unusual to hear quotes of poetry, to be read poetry, to perform poetry at family reunions. Not at all uncommon. I could, have many memories of my Aunt Sheila performing, and my grandmother also performing Paul Laurence Dunbar pieces and pieces from the Harlem Renaissance, and etc. So those are pieces that I was very much raised with. So poetry is a very natural language in our home and family. So, however, my siblings don't write much poetry. So I think, again, it's both. It's both a little bit of nature and nurture. And it's something that I was always pretty drawn to from a very early age. And largely, I think, too, it's about being able to have sort of my own private code language. Poetry allows you to say things without saying things all the time. And I think as a child, that was like a nice little way to keep my secrets while also saying what I wanted to without having to worry about someone reading a diary.
Oh, that's great. That's a great segue to my question. But before I ask that, I want to let everybody on the call know that you can still ask questions in the Q&A. So far, that's all the questions that we have here so far, but we've got plenty of time. So I want to invite everybody to pipe up if you've got something that you're curious about. And I have something I'm curious about in terms of the trajectory of your career and sort of when you writing and performing and going through this process as a child and seeing your family, and participating as in a family, when did that become a professional calling, and when did you decide I'm going to be a poet? This is going to be my, what you center your professional life around. I'm curious about that process and anything that you
Lynn, I think I've lost part of your question. You froze a little bit for me there. But
oh dear.
I got most of the question, I think. And now I hear you perfectly clearly. So the trajectory to being a poet professionally is a long one for sure. When I was a teenager, I was very clear with people when they asked me what I was going to be when I grew up, and I was very clear that I was going to be a poet. And they were very confused by this, and they'd say, like, what are you going to do for like money though? And I would say, well, I'm not sure yet how that's going to work, but I know for sure that I'm going to be a poet, and that's the thing that I am. So everything is going to have to allow that to be. That's always going to be the centerpiece, and that's the thing that I'm going to do, and the rest of the life has to get built around that. And essentially it has. I definitely had some time, and also like all of these things are kind of extensions of how I live my life, right? So I started out working in a nonprofit civil rights organization, and that's also, again, part of the same thing, right? It comes out of this excess and this void of like needing to create change, where change needs to happen, and also being a deeply feeling person, right? So I think the artist and the activist in me are very much the same, right? And the educator, they all coexist. And I'm doing all of those things pretty much all of the time. And so I don't know how to separate those things. So I started in that, but I was also still always writing poetry, performing poetry, right? Going to whatever open mic would have me, until eventually people started paying me to come out and read poems. And so in that process, I also became a mother very young. And so in the process of raising my daughter, I spent some time working in the corporate world. I spent about 10 years working in the corporate food business, of all things. I was an account executive for some different food companies. And that was a wild experience. And as my professional career as a poet was building and I was performing more nationally, that's where it started to get a bit tricky, right? So I was definitely going to hang on to my regular job and income. And I kept sort of scaling back my other career, my corporate career, so that I could make more space for my poetry career as time demanded, really. And as I had more work as a poet, I would do less work, in the corporate world. And then it got to the point where it was not at all uncommon for me to leave my job in the Denver Tech Center and drive to the airport, fly out to go do a show in some other city, get on the red eye, come back and go back to work the next morning like nothing happened. And that was how I was living my life. It was a little bit, well, it was unsustainable is what it was. I eventually became very, very ill. And at that corporate job, I eventually collapsed at work one day. And I army crawled my way back to my desk and pulled myself up. And they, of course, rush over like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." You know how your legs just give out, but I was not going to give up these benefits. Like, I'm a single mother. What? So I was not going to leave that job on purpose. Right? I was going to just I wasn't going to take the risk of being an artist full time. I had to really be forced into it. And so at that point, the job, I was a liability. They couldn't have me at work anymore. I was much too sick. And they said, "You have to go and come back when you're well." And then there was never a point where I went back to working in the corporate world. And that was in 2010. So, I learned a lot in the corporate world, and I've written a lot of poems around it. So that's great. Gave me some content, gave me some material. I'm a collector of many fine stories, and it's great because I'm a writer. So that's fantastic. Worked out. And I haven't been back, fortunately, and I hope I don't ever have to. So since then, I've been performing, writing, creating. There's also been some heavy music years. There've been some heavy writing years. There've been some heavy teaching years. So it sort of goes in these cycles. And now currently, there's a lot of teaching, a lot of writing, a lot of performing is what it sort of looks like. But no traveling now because we're in a pandemic. So I've been home for probably the longest time in my adult life. So that's a little bit. Did that answer your question, Lynn?
That did, and my apologies, my connection is a little sketchy, but yeah, thank you so much.
So we have one more question from Bree, and she says, "How does your editing process work? Do you find you have to separate the editing process from the creative writing process, or do they mix together? Is it helpful for you to work with outside editors?"
Wonderful question, Bree. So I do not edit until after the piece is written. I don't allow the editor part of my brain to even be functional or active when I'm writing. Again, the goal when I'm writing is never I try to get the audience out of my mind. I get everything out of my mind, and I try to write the thing that I need to write. I am my first audience, and I'm trying to write the thing that I feel most deeply, that I need to express most sincerely, that I need to express most urgently. And so that is the goal, just trying to write something honest. It might be complete dumpster fire. I write terrible poems quite frequently as part of my writing practice, right? That's the goal. It's just like, yeah, this is, I'm going to write 2 pages of hot garbage. And then maybe after that 2 pages gets out of the way, then we can get into like, oh, there's a line. But I don't actually usually know what I'm writing about when I sit down to write. I'm just writing. So I'm just there to kind of see what happens, just show up to the page, and I don't know, might be something good, might have a couple of salvageable lines, might end up writing something I really end up loving. And oftentimes though, it's going to start with hot garbage. I look at hot garbage as a success to write, because if I don't write it, then it's just going to be clogging the pipes. You understand? It's just going to be sitting there. And if I don't write it, then it's going to fester and ferment. So I have to get it out of the way. I think of it, I use this analogy for cooking, right? I can't cook in a dirty kitchen. I go into the kitchen and there's dishes in the sink and piled up and like, oh, I have to wash those dishes. I have to clean things up. I got to wipe down the counters. I've got to get things together so that I can really get down to the business of what I'm really there to do, right? But I can't do it until I get the kitchen clean. So I look at that like part of the writing practice as well, right? Just getting that stuff that's like junking up my creative flow, whatever's happening in my brain. If I got to just write the word waffles down 25 times until something else happens, that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to free write and keep that pen moving across the page. I'm old, so I write analog. So I still like to write on paper, unless I'm writing lyrics, actually. Then I usually like to write on a laptop. If I'm writing something structured or form, something that's following a really specific meter or syllable count, then I like to write on the computer. But most of the time, just for my own practice, I like to write by hand. And then whatever happens, happens. So a lot of it, again, is just washing those dishes and there's no judgment around it. I'm not even doing anything. Like we're just here, we're chopping a couple onions, like that's it, you know? And then we'll see if maybe we make something with this later. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll look at this and go like, well, look at all those radishes. Cool. Maybe if I need some radishes later, I know which page to come to in this journal and I'll find like a little splash of these, right? But the rest of it is not useful to me. And that's also fine. But it's like, getting all of that out kind of from my brain into something that I can look at. Then the editing process is organizing that. That's when I can go, oh, okay, so this is what I have here. And I feel like it's kind of like being in the Chopped kitchen, right? So if you watch Chopped on the Food Network, then I can look at all of those ingredients and say, okay, now that I've done this writing, generated all of these ingredients, if you will, now I can decide what to make with them. Maybe nothing, right? But maybe it's like, okay, you've got hot mustard and cake batter. Let's get into it. So maybe we just like keep going, right? Maybe we try to make some more ingredients, or maybe I say, okay, writing is done for the day. We've gotten this junk out of the way and I'll come back later. And when I need some cake batter, I'll pop back to this page. When I need some hot mustard, I'll pop back to this page, right? So it really depends on what the process of, or what the result of that day is. But ultimately, again, it starts with just clearing space, getting things out of my head and onto the page.
Awesome. Thank you. Hot mustard and cake batter, two of my favorite things. Try them together though. That could be an adventure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think that about wraps it up. I can't tell you how much we appreciate this. It's been such a wonderful, this has honestly been the highlight of my week, I have to say. So thank you so much. I'm sure I'm echoing many people's sentiments when I say that. And I'd love to just remind everybody that the session will be posted on the Greeley Creative District webpage shortly after we conclude. And a short survey will be on the screen afterwards to help you all give us feedback about our program and the work that we do on the Greeley Creative District Board. So thank you again, Suzi. We appreciate you so very much. And we hope that everyone has a lovely evening and we'll see you at our next event. Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Suzi.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.